Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Can you feel the weight of the day melting from your shoulders? Just breathe in slowly and let it all go. You're here now in a safe and quiet place. Nothing rushes here. Nothing chases you. The world, for a moment, has paused. Outside your window, the night hums softly, like a lullaby only you can hear. And here, in this stillness, I want to tell you a story. A story that floats like mist through the edges of memory, and sometimes I wonder if it truly happened at all. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing fall into rhythm, gentle like the sway of tall grass in the evening breeze. We're going back to a summer before notifications, before screens, before the world changed its pace. A summer that lives in whispers, half memory, half dream. There was once a boy, no one particularly special, and yet entirely unforgettable. He lived in a small neighborhood where the sun poured over the rooftops like warm honey, and the days seemed to stretch endlessly like golden ribbons across the sky. His name isn't important, not really. It could be yours, or mine, or the name of someone we lost along the way. This was the last summer before the internet, and whether it happened in truth or only in the hazy, perfect theater of longing, well, I'll let you decide that for yourself. But come closer now. I'll tell you everything. They say memories fade like old photographs left in the sun, but some remain untouched, tucked away in the corners of the mind, quiet and waiting. I carry one like that, a memory so gentle, so golden, that I revisit it when sleep won't come. Maybe you have one too, a perfect moment, a time so peaceful it feels almost imagined. My name doesn't really matter. I'm just someone who remembers. Someone who once lived through a summer so still, so sweet, it often returns in dreams. I was just a boy back then. Thin arms, scuffed knees, a backpack full of things that only made sense to me. I wasn't important. Not then, not now. But that summer made me feel like the world was paused just for us. There was no phone to buzz in your pocket, no urgency in the air, just time, endless, quiet, sun-drenched time. The kind of days where you woke up with no plans and ended up chasing dragonflies near the old creek behind the neighborhood. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the crunch of gravel under bicycle tires and the far-off bark of a dog who always knew when we were up to something. This isn't a story full of twists and turns. It's more like a soft breeze through the trees. Gentle, familiar, but real in its own way. And if you let it, maybe it will feel like your story too. It was the kind of town that barely appeared on maps. A dot lost in the creases of the Midwest, where the highway curved lazily and old diners sat stubbornly on corners, waiting for customers that never seemed to change. We called it Fairbridge, though the name was more hopeful than accurate. There was no grand bridge to speak of, only a rusted-over iron crossing that stood above a sleepy stream, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times and never photograph. But to us, it was everything. Fairbridge in the summer was like a painting left out in the sun. Soft colors, faded edges. The red brick of the post office looked almost pink in July. The paint on the old water tower peeled in long curls, like sunburnt skin. Trees lined the streets, tall and lean, whispering secrets to one another when the wind picked up. Everything smelled of cut grass, gasoline, and something sugary from Mrs. Kelly's bakery that clung to the air like memory. Our neighborhood, Maple Row, was a cluster of houses built sometime in the late 60s, each with its own squeaky porch swing and garden hose coiled like a green snake beside the driveway. The roads were uneven, patched with darker asphalt where winters had cracked the ground. No one complained. It gave the place character. You'd hear it in the rattle of your bike's wheels as you coasted down the hill by the fire station, hands off the handlebars, shirt billowing in the wind like a parachute. The houses weren't fancy. Vinyl siding, chain-link fences, screen doors that slammed shut if you didn't catch them just right. But each one held stories. The Murphys on the corner had wind chimes that sang a different song with every gust. Across from them, old Mr. Greaves still mowed his lawn in perfect diagonals, wearing a straw hat too big for his head. No one locked their doors back then, at least not in the daytime. We'd leave in the morning and wander until the sun dipped behind the hills, returning only when the cicadas screamed that the day was done. Just past Maple Row was Wildwood, not a real forest, just a thicket of stubborn trees and overgrown trails. But to us, it was a kingdom. Wildwood had its own rules. We built forts there from scrap wood and stolen blankets, named territories after TV characters, fought invisible wars, and buried treasures in old cookie tins. The air inside Wildwood was cooler, damper, filled with buzzing and birdsong. Sometimes you'd find initials carved into tree trunks and wonder if the kids who made them still lived around here, or if they ever really existed at all. Downtown Fairbridge was a 2-block stretch of storefronts frozen in time. The movie theater marquee hadn't changed since March. A single-screen place that still sold popcorn in waxy red and white tubs and showed one movie per week, usually something months behind the big cities. Beside it was the ice cream parlor, Scoops Ahoy, before the show made that name famous, where faded photos of banana splits hung in the windows, slightly warped from the sun. The laundromat buzzed constantly, its hum leaking into the streets like a heartbeat. The library, with its creaky floors and scent of old paper, was where Mrs. Elkins ruled with a whisper and a raised eyebrow. She knew every kid by name and would recommend books that somehow always matched the weather and your mood. She once told me I had an old soul. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. Now I think maybe she was right. The people of Fairbridge were stitched into the fabric of summer like threads you didn't notice until they were gone. There was a mailman who walked his route even in thunderstorms, wearing a blue poncho that made him look like a misplaced superhero. There were kids who sold lemonade for 50 cents but gave it away to friends. And there was always someone mowing their lawn, as if the sound of the engine was needed to fill the silence between radio songs and distant thunder. Fairbridge was slow. It moved like syrup, the kind of place where time wasn't measured in minutes, but in changes of light. Morning was golden and soft, noon was sharp and buzzing, and evening was where the magic lived. The street lights clicked on with a tired sigh. The sky turned the color of wet denim, and fireflies blinked like Morse code between the hedges, lighting the way home for boys who'd forgotten what hour it was. In the distance, the train would pass by twice a day, a long, slow rumble that shook the dishes in the cabinets. We'd pause whatever we were doing just to count the cars, waving to the conductor even though he never waved back. And for a moment, it felt like the outside world was real. That beyond Fairbridge there were cities with buildings that scraped the sky, oceans with no end, deserts that shimmered like dreams. But we never left. Not that summer. That summer the world was small and perfect. Even now, years later, I can still trace the map of that town in my mind. I can walk the cracked sidewalk past the bus stop, hear the echo of a screen door slamming 2 streets over, smell the charcoal from a neighbor's barbecue drifting lazily through the air. Fairbridge is gone, at least the way I remember it. But when I close my eyes and the night is still, I go back. And for a little while, I'm there again, standing barefoot on warm pavement, watching the sky turn pink, waiting for the stars. Every summer story worth remembering has a cast of characters you swear you'll never forget, until you do. Not because they weren't important, but because memory is strange like that. It folds things, hides them, tucks them away like letters in a drawer. But then, some nights, a breeze or a song will lift the edge of time, and they come rushing back. That's how it is with the people from that last summer before the internet. There was Jamie first, Jamie Bell, with hair like sunlit hay and too many freckles to count. We weren't best friends, not officially, but we always paired off when bikes were involved or when a plan needed hatching. Jamie had a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need announcing. He carried a pocket knife and a roll of duct tape everywhere, just in case, and claimed to have once caught a garter snake with his bare hands. No one doubted him. He lived 2 doors down, in the yellow house with the missing shutter and the chalk drawings that covered the driveway like cave art. Then came Elsie Cartwright, who had a new notebook for every season and a laugh like wind chimes in a storm. She'd moved to Maple Row the winter before, from some city up north, and never really got used to the slowness of Fairbridge. But she found magic in it anyway. Elsie was always writing something, diary entries, poems, little comics where we were superheroes or space explorers. She once told me she wanted to become a screenwriter. For movies that make people cry, she said, as if it were the highest form of art. And maybe it was. Elsie's brother, Sam, was a year older and obsessed with baseball to the point of absurdity. His room was a shrine to the Fairbridge Falcons, our town's hopeless little team. Posters, signed gloves, a batting helmet he wore while watching games on TV. He wasn't a bully, not really, but he had a way of making you feel smaller if he wanted to. Still, He'd sneak us popsicles from his mom's freezer and once gave Jamie and me a ride home in a thunderstorm, so he wasn't all bad, just older. Across the street lived twins, Laura and Louis Medina, identical in height, mismatched in everything else. Laura wore dresses and spoke in riddles, always asking questions like, "Do you think birds dream?" Or, "If we dig deep enough, can we find yesterday?" Louis was louder, a whirl of energy who broke things by accident and apologized with candy. They were inseparable, always darting in and out of our plans like comic relief in a movie we didn't know we were starring in. And then there was Mr. Greeley. Not a kid, obviously, but a fixture all the same. He lived alone in a house covered in ivy, with a front porch that groaned under his rocking chair. He wore suspenders even on hot days and smelled like pipe smoke and peppermints. Some kids said he was a retired magician. Others thought he was just lonely. But if you brought him a newspaper, he'd tell you a story, half real, half nonsense, and let you take a peach from his tree. He called everyone champ and never seemed surprised by anything. We had adults in the background, of course. Moms and dads who yelled about sunscreen or curfews, who grilled burgers and told ghost stories after dark. They hovered like shadows at the edge of our summer, there but not the focus. We were too busy being legends in our own small world to notice them much. But they were part of it too. Their radios played the soundtracks to our bike rides. Their sprinklers turned lawns into obstacle courses. Their barbecues marked the passage of weekends, like clock chimes for the lazy days. And I can't forget Max. Max was my dog. A mutt with too much energy and ears that never agreed on what direction to point. He followed us everywhere, tail high, tongue out, barking at bees and chasing birds he'd never catch. He understood more than most people, I think. When I was quiet, Max would nudge my hand with his nose, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. He slept at the foot of my bed and sometimes whined in his dreams like he was running through wildwood in his sleep. These were the people who made up my world that summer. They weren't perfect. We argued. We lied sometimes. We dared each other to do dumb things and occasionally got hurt. But there was something golden about them, like the hour just before sunset. They were the kind of friends who made you forget about clocks. The kind of people who, in the right light, looked like characters from a story you dreamt up years ago and only now remembered. We weren't trying to be important. We were just kids, bored, sunburnt, filled with too much sugar and too many questions. But in that stillness, between water balloon fights and cassette tape rewinds, we created something real, something worth returning to in dreams. There was a rhythm to that summer, the kind that didn't come from clocks or alarms but from sunlight on the curtains and the sound of sprinklers ticking in a neighbor's yard. Mornings didn't begin so much as they melted into being, the warmth slowly waking you like soft hands on your back. I remember the quiet first, how the world seemed to hold its breath before the birds remembered to sing. The fan above my bed would hum like a lullaby still playing, and sometimes I'd just lie there, staring at the ceiling, watching the light move in dappled shapes through the trees outside. Breakfast wasn't hurried. It was cereal in a faded bowl with cartoon characters on the sides, soggy by the time you finished because you were too busy staring out the window or feeding the dog bits of toast when no one was looking. My mom moved around the kitchen in a robe that smelled like vanilla lotion and warm laundry. She didn't rush. Nobody rushed in the summer. She'd hum songs from her teenage years and tap her fingers on the counter like she was playing invisible piano keys. My dad would be in the garage, already tinkering with something he claimed would run just fine once I find the right screw. By 10 o'clock, the neighborhood began to stir. You'd hear the thunk of screen doors, the shrill calls of friends calling each other's names like birds in the trees. Jamie's bike would clatter against the curb outside. Elsie would wave from across the street with a juice box in hand and a notebook already half full. The sun would climb, unhurried and steady, and the pavement would warm under your bare feet like a promise. We didn't plan our days. Not really. Plans belonged to school days and dentists and the adult world. Summer had no calendar, only the slow drip of time like melted popsicles. We followed our instincts instead, migrating to the shade of wildwood trees when it got too hot, inventing games with rules that changed every 5 minutes, biking in endless loops through the neighborhood as if repetition made things matter more. And sometimes it did. Lunch was an interruption, not a destination. Sandwiches with too much mayonnaise, crackers with cheese slices, watermelon so cold it hurt your teeth. We'd sit in someone's yard, legs stretched out like cats, the grass sticking to our skin. No one cared. Summer was for messes and stains. It was for dirt under your fingernails and band-aids on your knees. We were free in a way that felt ancient, like the whole world had agreed to forget about everything except now. Afternoons had a rhythm all their own. The heat slowed us down, made us lazy and happy. We'd retreat to porches with pitchers of lemonade, making bets on how long the ice cubes would last. Elsie would read her stories aloud, her voice soft and serious, like she was conjuring something real. Jamie would whittle sticks with his pocket knife or draw treasure maps in the dirt. Sometimes we'd all go quiet, lulled by the breeze, the creak of swing sets, the sleepy drone of bees in the garden. Around 4 o'clock, the air would shift. Not cooler, exactly, but gentler, like the day was starting to lean back in its chair. That's when we'd wander over to the creek to skip rocks or to Mr. Greeley's porch, where he'd hand us ginger snaps and ask riddles we never quite solved. Or we'd go down to the old elementary school playground, its rusted swings and faded murals feeling like ruins from a childhood not quite left behind. We'd push each other higher, shouting nonsense into the wind until the sky began to blush. Dinner was a family affair. Not fancy hot dogs, corn on the cob, baked beans with too much brown sugar. Someone's dad would be manning the grill like it was sacred duty. Moms would fuss with paper plates and plastic forks. Dogs would circle like little furry satellites, hoping for scraps. Sometimes neighbors joined in, folding chairs scraped across driveways, citronella candles lit as a half-hearted defense against the mosquitoes. We'd eat slowly, not because we were savoring the food, but because we were savoring the time, this golden pause before the day folded into twilight. Then came the best part. Evenings in Fairbridge were soft and humming. The sun would slide behind the hills in slow motion, painting the sky in sherbet colors. Fireflies blinked into being like little sparks of magic. We'd play tag until we couldn't see the boundaries anymore, laugh until our stomachs hurt. Parents called out warnings about bedtime that we ignored for as long as we dared. There was music sometimes, an old radio, someone's boombox playing a mixtape made from love songs and one-hit wonders. We told each other secrets in whispers under porch lights. We laid on our backs in the grass and looked for constellations we never really knew the names of. Max would curl beside me, ears twitching, sighing like he too understood how special it all was. In those moments, It didn't matter that we were kids. We felt ancient and eternal, like the world had stopped turning just to let us be. And when the yawns started and the stars grew brighter, we'd say goodbye like it wasn't goodbye. Like we'd pick up right where we left off tomorrow, and every tomorrow after that. Walking home under the flicker of street lamps, the silence felt kind, not empty. My feet would be dusty, my hair full of grass, my heart light as a balloon. And I'd fall asleep knowing that tomorrow, the rhythm would start again. There was a field at the far edge of Fairbridge, past the old train tracks that no longer carried trains and the rusted fence we were told never to climb. Nobody knew who it belonged to, or if it belonged to anyone at all. It wasn't marked on any map, and no adults ever mentioned it. It felt untouched, like time had chosen to skip it altogether. We called it the clearing, though it wasn't really clear at all, not in the way grown-ups meant. It was wild, with tall grass that reached our waists and flowers that looked too delicate to be real, like they had been painted with soft watercolors and left to dry under the sun. You had to know how to get there. There was no path, just a pattern, a rhythm of turns, ducking under branches, counting fence posts. Jamie was the first to find it. He'd wandered off one day chasing a rabbit, or maybe just chasing the idea of one. When he came back, breathless and wild-eyed, he described it like a secret spell. It's quiet like the world forgot it, but not in a sad way. More like it's sleeping, waiting. So we went. The first time I stepped into that clearing, it was like entering a dream I hadn't realized I'd been having. The light was different there, warmer, softer, and golden in a way that made everything look older and newer at the same time. The grass swayed without wind. The trees circled it like guardians, ancient and tall, their trunks thick with moss and stories we'd never hear. In the very center stood an old wooden structure. It wasn't quite a cabin, more like the suggestion of one. For half walls and a roof slouched to one side, its wood silvered with time and rain. We never questioned how it got there. We never saw signs of tools or nails. It simply was, like the clearing itself had dreamed it into being. Inside, it smelled like cedar and dust and sun-warmed leaves. Someone, long ago, maybe a ghost child, had left things behind. A rusted lantern, a cracked mirror, a drawer filled with yellowed papers too faded to read. There was a blanket folded neatly in the corner, embroidered with stars. Elsie said it must have belonged to a child who'd lived there, a child who never wanted to be found. We didn't speak loudly when we were in that place. It felt like a sacred thing. You whispered or you said nothing at all. We claimed it as ours, of course. We swept out the leaves and patched the walls with branches and old tarps. We brought candles and marbles and string, things that felt like they should belong there. We gave it a name, though we never wrote it down. To speak it too often felt wrong, like we'd break the spell. Jamie built a shelf out of driftwood. Elsie drew symbols on the floor with chalk, spirals and stars and hearts that she insisted were for protection. I brought my grandfather's old compass, which spun wildly whenever we were inside. We didn't ask why. Some days we just sat there in the clearing, lying back on the soft earth, talking about nothing. We made up stories, that the cabin was built by a runaway prince, or that it was a doorway to another world that only opened on the last day of summer. Jamie swore he saw a fox watching us from the edge of the trees, not just any fox, but one with silver fur and knowing eyes. Elsie said the clearing wasn't on the map because it wasn't part of this world at all. It was a memory that had slipped through the cracks of time and landed here, just for us. There were butterflies in that field that shimmered blue and gold, and birds we never heard anywhere else. The air was always warm, even when clouds rolled in. We never felt afraid there. Even when thunder growled in the distance or shadows stretched long and deep, the clearing stayed gentle, protective, like it chose us. But we never stayed past twilight. That was the one rule we never broke. As the sun dipped low and the light turned thick and honeyed, something in the clearing would change, not into something bad, just something vast. Too vast. The kind of vastness that made you aware of your smallness, your softness. We always left together, looking back only once, whispering a thank you to whatever lived there, whatever let us borrow that magic for a little while. And then one day it was gone. Not suddenly, but slowly, like a dream slipping through your fingers as you try to remember it after waking. The grass grew shorter. The trees thinned. The clearing itself seemed less clear, less golden. We couldn't find the path. Even when we retraced every step, followed every twist of memory, the place refused to appear. The more we searched, the more we forgot. Not the feeling that stayed with us, but the details. What side the door was on. Whether there really was a fox. Whether we dreamed it all in the long golden haze of August. But I remember this, the way the light moved through the trees. The way the earth felt under my hands. The sound of Elsie's laugh echoing off the cabin walls. The hush that wrapped around us like a lullaby. And sometimes, even now, I feel that hush again. In the space between waking and sleep, in the quiet hum of distant crickets, in the scent of warm cedar carried by the wind. It was real. I know it was. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe some places are only meant to exist once, and only for those who need them most. There are certain friendships that only make sense in a particular season of life, as if they were flowers that bloom only once under a specific light. That summer felt like it was woven just for us, each golden day crafted with care, as if time itself had paused its usual rhythm to observe us quietly. There was something sacred about those connections, something weightless and pure, unburdened by promises or expectations. We belonged to each other without ever needing to say it aloud. There were three of us. Me, Jamie, and Elsie. Jamie had a spirit that seemed touched by wind and stars. He always believed there was magic just beneath the surface of things. In puddles, in shadows, even in the rustle of leaves. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it felt like he was reading from an old map that only he could see. Elsie was brightness wrapped in mystery. Her laughter was sudden and full, and she often whispered secrets to trees, saying they remembered things that people had forgotten. She believed every silence had a message, if we just learned how to listen. We didn't need plans. Our days formed themselves. We knew where to find each other, by the lake after breakfast, or in the clearing past the willow trees as the sun began its slow descent. There were no texts, no calls, no agreements. Just knowing, just presence. We didn't think of time in hours or dates, but in the soft shift between light and dark, in the number of bug bites on our legs or how faded our shirts had become from the sun. The adventures we had didn't need maps. We invented games as we went, built forts from forgotten planks and laughter, turned patches of woods into kingdoms, and made ourselves the rulers of invisible realms. The world bent to our imaginations. One day, Jamie found a dusty bottle half buried in the lakeshore sand. Inside was a curled paper with faint marks that none of us could decipher. We declared it a treasure map. For the next week, we scoured every trail and tree stump, pretending we were following clues laid down by someone from the future, or maybe by a version of ourselves from a forgotten past. Elsie said the map had a heart of its own, and it would only reveal itself if we stopped searching with our eyes. Jamie thought it was leading us to a memory we hadn't yet made. I didn't say much. I just followed them, loving the way they believed in things that couldn't be proven. That was the gift of that summer. Nothing had to be real to feel true. We shared everything. The last bites of sandwiches too warm from the sun, the secret places where frogs nested, the stories we made up by the fire pit when the sky went purple. And when we didn't speak, the silence between us was soft and comfortable, like a favorite old song. There was no fear of being misunderstood, no need to impress. We just were. One day, Jamie brought a box of old cassette tapes he'd found in his dad's garage. We didn't have a player that worked, so we just read the titles out loud and imagined what they sounded like. We made up lyrics and melodies, pretending we were a band that had existed in another timeline. Elsie sang nonsense words to a tune that kept repeating in her head, and we lay in the grass, staring up through the leaves, pretending we were famous or forgotten or both. We built rituals without realizing it. We collected smooth stones from the river and lined them on a windowsill like trophies. We made necklaces from dandelion stems and buried our treasures in jars under the oak tree, vowing never to tell anyone else their location. We scratched our initials into bark and traced them every time we passed by, as if marking the world to prove we were here, that we mattered, that we had this, even if only for a little while. There were moments that felt like eternity, like when the three of us floated in the lake at dusk, the water like velvet, our arms spread wide, faces turned toward a sky painted with soft purples and sleepy oranges. Or when we sat at the edge of the dock, legs swinging, watching the fireflies blink into existence one by one, like stars that had decided to come down just to be closer to us. I remember one night in particular. We were lying on a patch of grass, heads close, eyes up. Elsie whispered that maybe we weren't children at all, but old souls revisiting the beginning of something. Jamie murmured that if this was a dream, he hoped we'd never wake up. I said nothing, afraid that words might break the spell. And somewhere in that quiet, I felt a calm I've never quite recaptured, the kind that makes you forget your name and simply feel like part of the sky. There was a soft sadness beneath the joy, but we didn't recognize it then. It was the kind of sadness that only visits when you're somewhere perfect, and some part of you already knows it won't last. It was in the long shadows at the end of the day, the way the crickets got louder as night fell, the chill that made us pull our sweaters closer. We didn't talk about it. We just held tighter to each other, laughing louder, staying out later, making new memories faster than the sun could steal them. We never fought. Not really. There were days when one of us was quiet or distant, but we gave each other space without asking why. There was trust, deep and unspoken, like roots beneath the surface. We knew we were safe with each other. We knew, somehow, that this summer mattered in a way no one else would understand. And when the wind shifted and the days grew shorter, we began to feel the change. Not in a dramatic way, but like a door slowly closing at the end of a long corridor. We didn't cry or complain. Instead, we marked the ending with gestures. Jamie left his slingshot on the branch of our favorite tree. Elsie tied a blue ribbon around a wooden post by the lake. I buried my grandfather's compass in a tin box beside the biggest stone in the clearing, promising to return one day. Our final evening was quiet. We didn't talk much as we watched the sun dip below the hills. The air was thick with that golden hush that only late summer knows. When it was time to go, no one said goodbye. Children rarely do. We just drifted apart, walking our separate paths, the weight of everything we'd shared pressing gently on our shoulders. Even now, when the breeze catches just right or I smell wet earth after a summer rain, I feel them near. Jamie's quiet wonder, Elsie's wild laughter, the echo of my own voice when it still believed the world was endless. That summer faded, but those friendships, they stayed. Not in the way most people expect. Not in texts or reunions or old photographs. But in the way certain memories anchor themselves to your soul, becoming part of who you are. They were my family in that fleeting season between who I was and who I would become. And even if it was just a chapter in the long story of life, it's one I return to again and again, like a soft song I only half remember, beautiful, distant, and somehow still playing. There are certain things that slip through the cracks of time, little enigmas that never offer conclusions, only whispers. That summer, they gathered quietly around us like dew on grass, too delicate to chase, yet impossible to forget. We didn't speak of them much. We just noticed, wondered, and let them remain as they were, unexplained, untouched, a little eerie, a little magical. Maybe that was part of the beauty. Some things were meant to stay open, like half-finished lullabies still echoing in the night. The first mystery started early in late June on the trail that led to our secret meadow. Someone had carved a perfect spiral into a smooth stone just before the bend in the path. It hadn't been there the day before. The grooves were fresh, not quite weathered, not done with a child's hand. None of us admitted to making it, and no one else ever claimed to walk that trail. We ran our fingers over it every day, like it was a kind of portal or a secret key. Elsie believed it was a message, and Jamie said it might be a marker for something buried. But no matter how much we dug around it, we found nothing. Not even bugs, not even roots. Just earth. Clean, untouched earth. As if the ground there had decided not to grow anything anymore. Then there was the old camper trailer in the woods behind the orchard. White, rust-stained, and leaning slightly to one side, like it had been left there in a hurry. The windows were dark, too dusty to see through, and the door was locked with a chain. We only discovered it one day when we wandered off the usual path, following a rabbit that had darted through the brush. It looked abandoned, but there was a fresh footprint in the dirt near the tire. A grown-up's boot. We never saw anyone go in or out. We never heard anything from inside. But sometimes, if we passed by at dusk, a faint humming came from the direction of the trailer, like a distant lullaby being played on an old record player, barely holding its pitch. The sound would stop the moment we stepped too close. Elsie swore she saw light through the curtain once, flickering like candlelight. Jamie wanted to break the lock and go in, but something about the stillness of that place made me hesitate. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like reverence, like the feeling you get in an empty church or a forgotten graveyard. We left it alone after that. Not because we had to, but because some part of us agreed it was better that way. Another mystery lived near the lake, where the cattails grew thick and tall. There was a log there, hollow and half-submerged, where frogs liked to sit and dragonflies danced above the water. One morning, we found a necklace draped over the log. A silver chain, thin and delicate, with a tiny charm shaped like a moon. It was polished, not tarnished by rain or time, and it was warm to the touch, as if it had just been placed there moments before. We waited to see if someone would come back for it, but no one did. Elsie wore it for a while, then said it made her dreams too vivid, like someone else's memories were slipping into her sleep. She took it off and tied it to the branch of a tree near our fort. A week later, it was gone. We looked for it for days, but it never turned up again. Not even a glint of silver in the grass. There were also the birds. Every afternoon at the same hour, a group of 5 small blackbirds would fly over the clearing in a perfect V shape, low and slow. We started counting on it. For a clock. They'd appear out of nowhere, glide past in silence, then vanish into the trees beyond the lake. They never made a sound. Not a chirp, not a flutter. Jamie called them watchers. Elsie thought they were omens. I just liked their quiet presence. But one day, they didn't come, and they never came again after that. Stranger still was the radio. It belonged to my grandfather, a heavy old thing that sat in the corner of the sunroom. It hadn't worked in years, its wires frayed and its knobs stiff. But one evening, while I was alone, it crackled to life. No music, just static and a faint voice, like someone whispering through wind. I tried to make out the words, but they slipped away every time I leaned in. When I ran to get someone, the sound vanished. Jamie said maybe the radio wasn't broken, just waiting for the right moment. Elsie said it was a message meant only for me. I never heard it again. Even the stars played tricks on us. One night, we lay in the grass behind Elsie's house, staring up at the sky. She pointed to a cluster of stars that none of us had noticed before, shaped like a spiral, not unlike the one carved into the stone. We looked for it every night after that, but it never appeared again. The sky changed, and the pattern was gone. I still wonder if it was ever there at all. And then there were the dreams. Not just mine, but all 3 of us. Around mid-July, we each began waking up with memories that didn't feel like ours. Elsie dreamt of a girl in a white dress running through fog. Jamie said he saw an old train station that didn't exist in our town, with our names written in chalk on the walls. I dreamt of a hallway filled with doors, and behind one of them, I heard us laughing. But I never found the handle. These dreams stopped as suddenly as they started, leaving behind only a vague ache, like something important had been forgotten. We tried writing everything down once, in a notebook Jamie kept under his bed. We called it the Book of Almost. It had drawings, maps, notes, symbols. But by the end of August, the book had vanished. We searched every inch of his room, turned drawers upside down, looked under the porch, even checked the trailer in the woods. It was gone. Elsie said maybe the book had decided to leave when it was full. Jamie said it might have been claimed by the mysteries themselves. Looking back, I think we didn't really want answers. What mattered was the feeling. The way those little puzzles made the world feel bigger, older, deeper. Like we were living inside a story being written just for us. Maybe the mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Maybe they were gifts, fragments of wonder, scattered through that summer to remind us that not everything needed to be understood to be real. Even now, when I find a stone shaped like a spiral or hear a radio whisper for no reason, I stop. I listen. I remember. That summer taught me that the world is full of quiet riddles, and the most beautiful ones are those we carry with us, unanswered, for the rest of our lives. There's something sacred about walking when you have nowhere to be. No endpoint, no urgency, just feet moving forward, eyes wandering freely, and time stretching out like soft fabric in the afternoon sun. That summer, our days were stitched together with these kinds of walks. Wandering became its own kind of ritual. We didn't need reasons. The world was enough. It was the kind of freedom that only children and birds seem to understand. The simple act of drifting, of being carried gently by curiosity. It would usually begin after breakfast, when the sun was still low and golden, brushing the tops of the fields in a sleepy haze. Jamie would show up first, swinging his backpack over one shoulder even though it barely held anything. Maybe a pocket knife, a slingshot, or some sunflower seeds. Elsie came next, always barefoot, always humming. And I'd meet them at the end of the gravel path near the mailbox, where the sound of cicadas started to swell like a slow drum roll. We rarely spoke about where we were going. One of us would just start walking and the others would follow. Sometimes we took the trail behind the old dairy farm, where the wooden fences leaned into the grass and cows blinked slowly at us as if they'd seen us in dreams. Other times we crossed the orchard, our arms brushing against the leaves heavy with pears and plums, the scent of sugar and sap lingering on our clothes. Every place we went had a sound, a rhythm, the crunch of dried grass, the creak of distant wind chimes, the rustle of squirrels making tiny decisions in the treetops. We'd stop to touch everything. A patch of moss that felt like velvet, a broken swing tied to an oak branch, swaying with no wind, the spine of a pine cone. Our pace was never steady. Sometimes we'd sprint down hills just to feel the thrill of our hearts catching up. Other times, we'd move so slowly that ants could build empires around us. The world was endless when you weren't rushing through it. It unfolded like a story written in invisible ink, only revealed when you slowed down enough to let it appear. I remember one morning in late July. The air was thick with the promise of rain, but the clouds hadn't broken yet. We followed the riverbank, where dragonflies darted like living jewels above the water. Jamie tossed pebbles into the current, timing their splash with the beat of his own steps. Elsie collected flat stones and stacked them into tiny towers, leaving them behind like gentle markers of our presence. I didn't say much that day. I was listening. There was a distant train whistle, a barking dog, the flap of wings overhead. Even silence had a sound if you paid enough attention. As we walked, time changed shape. We'd leave in the morning and return hours later with only a vague sense of how long we'd been gone. Our shadows would lengthen across the gravel, and our skin would carry the scent of wind and leaves. I once found a feather that looked like it had been dipped in silver. I kept it in my pocket for the rest of the summer, unsure if it belonged to a bird or something stranger. Sometimes, our walks led us to forgotten places. A rusted-out truck overgrown with ivy. A gate that opened into nothing but thickets and briars. One time, we discovered a half-buried foundation where a house used to stand. All that was left were the stones and a chimney that reached into the sky like a memory. We imagined the family that once lived there, invented names for them, guessed what stories they might have told by candlelight. Those places never felt sad, just distant, like dreams that had finished being dreamed. One of my favorite paths was the one that led past the sunflower fields. At their peak, They towered over us, tall and solemn, their yellow heads turning slowly with the sun. Walking beside them felt like passing a crowd of silent watchers, guardians of some ancient secret. Elsie said they whispered things at night. Jamie claimed one had moved when he wasn't looking. I just liked how small I felt beside them, like I had slipped into someone else's story and had been welcomed without question. We carried snacks sometimes, stolen from kitchens and wrapped in napkins. Grapes, butter cookies, chunks of cheese. We'd sit by the edge of a creek and eat slowly, watching the way the water caught the light and bent it. Everything shimmered. Even the ordinary became holy when you weren't in a hurry. A floating leaf became a boat. A puddle became a portal. Shadows became doorways to places we couldn't name. Once we followed a fox. It darted from the underbrush and looked at us for a long, deliberate second before trotting away. We moved after it without speaking, drawn by something unspoken. It led us deeper into the woods than we'd ever gone, to a clearing filled with wildflowers we'd never seen before. Pale blue, with petals like lace. The fox disappeared and we never saw it again. But we returned to that spot often, just to sit, just to breathe. Even on the days when our legs ached and our skin itched from burrs and sunburn, we didn't stop. Something in us needed to keep moving, not toward something, but away from the ticking clock of growing up. Each walk felt like a pause button pressed gently against the rush of time. Maybe we sensed even then that these were the kinds of days that wouldn't come back. There were no smartphones, no GPs, no playlists in our ears, just the breath of summer and the steady beat of our own footsteps. Sometimes we'd sing. Sometimes we'd walk for miles without saying a word. It never felt empty. It felt full in the way that dreams are full even if you can't explain them. As the days grew shorter, our paths changed. We walked slower, talked more about school starting again, about things we were trying not to think about. There was a quietness creeping into our steps, not sad, just different. Like the world knew summer was slipping away and wanted us to notice. And we did. Now, when I walk through city streets or down quiet country roads, a part of me still listens for the sounds of those summer walks. The laughter echoing through trees, the crack of a branch under a barefoot step, the hush of wind moving through fields of tall grass. That part of me still believes that if I walk long enough, without purpose or plan, I might find my way back. Not just to the places, but to the feeling. To the time when the world was made of secrets and sunbeams and long walks that never needed a reason. It happened quietly, like how twilight begins without anyone noticing. One day you're in the middle of a game, laughter rising into the heat, and the next, something feels different. The sun still shines, the trees still sway in the breeze, but there's a shift, a quiet, invisible current that begins to pull everything in a slightly different direction. That's what it felt like. Not sadness, not even fear, just the first brush of change against the skin of that perfect summer. It started on an afternoon that looked like any other. The sky was open and endless, a brilliant blue with cotton clouds melting slowly across it. We were out near the edge of town, in the clearing where the old railroad tracks curved into the trees. That was one of our favorite places, not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't. No fences, no rules, just space and sky and the sound of wind. Jamie had found a long stick and was using it to draw shapes in the dirt. Elsie was chasing a grasshopper through patches of clover. I was lying on my back, staring up at the clouds and trying to decide if one of them looked more like a bear or a castle. Everything felt the same, but somehow it wasn't. Was the light, maybe, a little softer? Or the silence between our voices, just a touch longer than usual? Then Jamie said something that made us all pause. He asked if we thought we'd still be friends when school started again. He didn't mean it in a sad way. Just curious, the way you ask if it's going to rain or what time dinner might be. But the question hung in the air like dust. None of us answered right away. Elsie sat down and started picking at the petals of a flower. I rolled onto my side. Jamie pretended to draw a circle, but it came out crooked. It was the first time the future had stepped into our summer. Until then, everything had existed in a kind of endless now. Days passed, sure, but they bled into each other like watercolor. There were no deadlines, no clocks, only the sun's slow dance across the sky. But in that moment, the spell cracked. Not shattered, just a small, almost invisible fracture. We all felt it, even if we didn't say so. Later that evening, I sat on my porch and watched the streetlight flicker on. The sound of a lawn sprinkler ticked rhythmically from across the road. In the distance, someone's wind chimes played a sleepy tune, and a moth bumped softly against the screen door. I felt something in my chest then, a tightness I couldn't explain, like I was holding my breath for a reason I didn't understand. I thought about Jamie's question. I thought about the trees losing their leaves, about backpacks and pencils and alarm clocks, the world outside our summer. The days that followed weren't any less beautiful. If anything, we tried harder to soak them in. We ran faster, laughed louder, explored deeper, as if we could outrun the turning of the page. But the feeling lingered, soft and constant, like the hush of a tide pulling away from shore. One morning, Elsie brought a jar of fireflies to our hiding spot behind the hay bales. She said she wanted to let them go, to see where they flew. We opened the lid together and watched them rise, blinking gently like tiny stars. I remember thinking they looked like memories, scattering into the dusk before we could follow. I didn't talk to anyone about it, not really. It didn't feel like the kind of thing you could put into words. It was a shift in the air, a change in the music. Even our walks began to feel different. Not worse, just more aware. We noticed more things. The way the sun was setting a little earlier, how the cicadas sounded louder, almost desperate. We lingered at places we used to pass quickly, spent longer at the creek, sat in silence beneath trees as the leaves began to whisper their goodbyes. One afternoon, we passed an old calendar nailed to a barn wall. Most of the pages had curled and browned from the weather, but August was still pinned there, flapping in the breeze. The days were marked with faded red circles, birthdays maybe, or appointments long since forgotten. Jamie stared at it for a long time before saying he hated calendars. Elsie nodded. I didn't say anything, but I remember feeling the same. Calendars were just reminders of endings we hadn't agreed to. My parents began mentioning school supplies at dinner. The television ads changed from beach toys to notebooks. Even the grocery store felt colder, as if the shelves knew the season was changing. I tried to pretend I didn't notice. I clung to our rituals. The long walks, the creek swims, the late-night stargazing from the treehouse. But every moment began to carry the weight of almost. Almost over. Almost gone. The last week of summer came with a sudden stillness. The air was thicker, the birds quieter. We all felt it, like the final chords of a lullaby drifting into silence. One night, we gathered behind the library where the grass grew tall and the stars came out unbothered by streetlights. Jamie had brought a flashlight and we passed it around, making shadows on the brick wall, telling ghost stories we made up on the spot. Elsie lay on her back, watching the sky, her fingers tracing invisible shapes in the air. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, listening to the crickets and the far-off sound of a train. That was when I knew, really knew, that something was ending. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears or grand declarations. Just a feeling, a knowing, that this chapter, this perfect stretch of time, was winding down, that we couldn't hold it forever, no matter how tightly we tried. I've often wondered since then if that was the moment I began to understand the nature of time. That nothing gold stays, as the poem says. That beauty, real beauty, is sometimes so fleeting that it leaves behind a ghost of itself. And maybe that's the gift, that we got to live it at all. Now, when I think back to that summer, it plays in my mind like an old tape, slightly faded at the edges, warmed by memory. I remember that first sense of ending not as a sadness, but as a deep and quiet gratitude. Because I had been there, because we had shared it, and because some things, even as they slip away, leave behind a light that never goes out. There was something sacred about the way the sky changed colors in the evening. It wasn't just the beauty, though that was always breathtaking in its quiet way. It was the stillness that came with it, like the whole world was pausing to take a long, slow breath. That was when the lights softened, when the outlines of things grew gentler, and when even the loudest kids on the block grew a little quieter. In the heart of that summer, I started watching sunsets more closely. Not just as a background to our games, but as a ritual. A moment that felt stitched into the magic of those days. The first time I truly noticed it was late in July, a Tuesday maybe, or a Thursday. The days had stopped having names by then. It was just another long afternoon bleeding lazily into evening. Jamie and Elsie had gone home early, and I was alone on the hill behind our neighborhood, the one with the crooked fence and the tall grass that tickled your ankles. I lay there with my arms behind my head, watching the sky do something I hadn't really appreciated before. It wasn't just changing from light to dark. It was putting on a show, a slow, deliberate one. At first, the blue began to deepen, like a secret being whispered across the heavens. Then came the oranges and golds, not all at once, but in streaks and smudges like a painter testing different shades. The clouds, which had been lazy and white, turned into floating embers, glowing from the inside. I remember thinking it looked like someone had taken a giant match and lit the edges of the world. And then, just as quietly, it all began to fade, giving way to a lavender hush that made everything feel like a dream you didn't want to wake from. That night, I went home and told my mom I wanted to eat dinner on the porch. She smiled, warmed something on the stove, and brought out 2 plates. We sat on the old swing and ate while the sky darkened above us, the colors still fresh in my mind. She told me how her grandmother used to say that the sky at sunset was God's way of tucking the world into bed. That thought stayed with me for a long time. Even now, I think about it every time I see the sky blush before nightfall. From that day on, watching the sunset became a part of my routine. If I was with Jamie and Elsie, I'd insist we stop whatever game we were playing to turn our eyes to the sky. If I was alone, I'd find a spot to sit and let the silence wrap around me like a soft blanket. It never got boring. No two sunsets were alike. Some were fiery and dramatic, as if the day had something to prove. Others were gentle, almost shy, tiptoeing into the evening like they didn't want to disturb anyone. There was a particular evening I remember more clearly than most. The three of us had walked to the old bridge on the edge of town. It wasn't in use anymore, just a wooden skeleton stretching across a narrow creek. We liked it because it felt like something forgotten, a piece of the world that had slipped through time. We climbed onto the wooden beams, sat with our legs dangling over the edge, and passed around a half-melted chocolate bar from someone's backpack. The sky was doing something incredible that night. It wasn't just orange or pink. It was layered. Deep blue at the top, fading into violet, then to rose, and finally gold right above the horizon. The creek below caught some of those colors, shimmering with each tiny ripple. Birds flew overhead in lazy arcs, calling out as if to say goodbye to the sun. None of us spoke for a long time. There was no need to. We were part of the moment, and the moment didn't ask for anything but silence. It was during these evenings that I began to understand something I hadn't before. That time wasn't just something that moved forward. It was something you could feel stretch and slow if you really paid attention. That a moment, no matter how fleeting, could be held in the chest like breath. And that beauty, the quiet kind, wasn't always found in big things. Sometimes it was in the way light filtered through tree leaves, or how the clouds seemed to hold hands before drifting apart. There was also a peaceful kind of sadness to it, not the sharp kind that makes you cry, but the soft kind that sits in your throat and makes you notice things more. The way Elsie's laugh always rose just before the sun dipped below the trees. How Jamie's eyes seemed to reflect the sky when he wasn't talking. The way the wind changed direction as the light faded, brushing the grass in a different rhythm. It was all part of the dance. Part of the ending that wasn't quite an end. I started to wonder how many sunsets I had missed before. How many evenings had passed without me really seeing them. That summer taught me that you could live an entire life inside a single hour if you let yourself. That light and shadow, when they touched just right, could make the world feel brand new. It made me want to hold on to everything more tightly. The laughter, the smells of cut grass and melting popsicles, the warmth of the wood beneath my feet on the bridge. One evening, near the end of summer, we decided to climb the big hill behind the church, the one that gave the best view of the town. We brought snacks, old blankets, and a tiny radio that only caught static and one station that played old jazz. As the sun began its descent, we lay there in a tangle of limbs and stories, pointing out shapes in the clouds and arguing over which ones looked more like dinosaurs or dragons. The light stretched over our skin like honey. The trees cast long, gentle shadows. And for a while, it felt like we were the only ones in the world. As the colors deepened, we grew quiet. The kind of quiet that feels full, not empty. The kind where everyone is thinking the same thing, but no one wants to be the one to say it out loud. We knew the summer was winding down, that these days were becoming fewer, but we also knew we were part of something rare, something we'd remember long after the sky turned dark. That night, as we walked home under a canopy of stars, I kept looking back over my shoulder at the last streaks of color fading into black. I felt grateful, not just for the sunset, but for the fact that I had learned how to see it, really see it, that I had shared it with people who made it mean even more, and that somehow, no matter what the future held, The memory of those skies would always be mine to return to. Even now, years later, I still pause to watch the sky change. I still feel that same hush, that same gentle ache that beauty leaves behind. And sometimes, just sometimes, I close my eyes and I'm back there, on the bridge, on the hill, watching the sky paint its story above us, feeling the world hold its breath for one last splash of color before the dark. There was no exact moment when summer ended. It didn't draw a line in the sand or slam a door behind itself. It slipped away slowly, like the tide pulling back just a little more each day. But we felt it all the same, not in loud ways, but in the quieter ones. The sun no longer hung as high or as long in the sky. The cicadas didn't sing quite as loudly at night. The air, once thick with the scent of grass and heat, began to carry a faint edge of something cooler, something waiting. The mornings were the first to betray the change. I started waking up to windows kissed with dew, the sky pale and unsure. My bed, which had once been too warm to stay in, became a little more comfortable, and I lingered longer beneath the covers, listening to the soft hush of early birds. Mom began mentioning school supplies. Jamie talked about visiting cousins out of state. Elsie asked if we thought we'd still ride our bikes when fall came. We all knew what was coming, but no one wanted to say it out loud. We tried to fight it in the only way kids know how, by pretending it wasn't happening. We packed our days even fuller than before, waking earlier and staying out later, as if we could trick time by making more memories. We climbed trees we had never noticed, made up new games with complicated rules that changed by the minute, and rode our bikes down roads that led nowhere in particular. Everything suddenly seemed more important. Even the smell of pavement after a light rain felt worth remembering. One of those last afternoons, we returned to the bridge. It had become our quiet place, our sanctuary. This time, we brought a notebook. Elsie had the idea. She wanted us to write down everything we could remember from that summer. Names of kids we had met, places we had discovered, things we had said that made us laugh so hard we couldn't breathe. Jamie drew silly pictures in the margins. I wrote the date in the corner, though I didn't really know why. Maybe I wanted proof that all of it had really happened, that it wasn't just something I had dreamed. As the sun dipped lower than usual, we watched the sky shift into one of its softer performances. Pale golds, a hint of rose, and wisps of cloud that floated like feathers across the horizon. I remember wishing I could bottle the light, keep it in a jar beside my bed, and open it on winter mornings when everything felt gray and slow. That evening, we didn't talk much. We passed around a bag of sunflower seeds and took turns spitting shells into the creek below. Every sound echoed a little longer. Every breath seemed deeper. The next day, I woke to the sound of boxes being moved. My mom had started sorting through my closet, pulling out school clothes and setting aside shoes that no longer fit. The house had that quiet bustle of transition. I wandered outside and found the swing creaking in the backyard, moving on its own in the soft breeze. Even the air smelled different. Less like sunscreen and cut grass, more like dry leaves and morning fog. That afternoon, I met Jamie and Elsie at the woods near our hideout. We had brought snacks and an old flashlight with a cracked lens. The ground was already littered with early leaves, crisp and golden around the edges. We decided to build something, not a fort this time, but a time capsule. We found a rusted cookie tin in Jamie's garage, lined it with napkins, and began adding treasures. A plastic dinosaur. A Polaroid of Elsie making a funny face. A friendship bracelet. A cassette tape with nothing on it but our voices singing off-key. Before we buried it, we each made a wish. Not the kind you speak out loud, but the kind you hold in your chest and hope the earth remembers for you. Then we covered it with dirt, pressed our palms into the ground above it, and promised not to come back for a long time. Maybe never. I think we knew, even then, that going back wouldn't bring the summer with it. Some things are meant to live only in memory. As the days grew shorter, so did our time together. Jamie's family left for their trip. Elsie had to help her mom with chores. I spent more time alone, wandering the streets of our neighborhood like a ghost revisiting familiar haunts. I stopped by the corner store and found the old gumball machine had been replaced. The cashier I liked had moved on. Even the soda fridge had a new hum, like a different kind of heartbeat. The world had begun to shift, just slightly out of alignment with the one I had known. One evening, I sat on the porch with my mom as the sky turned that familiar shade of lavender and peach. She handed me a cup of warm tea, something she hadn't done all summer. I didn't ask why. I just sipped and listened to the crickets. She asked how I was feeling. I told her I didn't know, that everything felt a little quieter, a little slower. She smiled and said that was how seasons change, not all at once, but piece by piece, until one day you wake up and everything is different. And she was right. A few mornings later, I woke to the sound of my alarm clock. The first day of school. My sneakers, once dusty from adventures, now looked polished and out of place. My backpack had stiff zippers. My notebooks were blank, waiting. I walked to the bus stop alone, the sky still half asleep above me. The air was cooler. My breath felt sharper. And yet, as I stood there, I could still smell the summer in the folds of my hoodie. Still feel the sunlight on my skin, even if it wasn't there. I realized then that the summer hadn't really ended. Not the part that mattered. It was in the notebook tucked under my bed, in the scratch on my bike frame, in the memory of Elsie's laugh and Jamie's crooked smile. It lived in the colors of the sky, in the whisper of trees, in the warmth of evenings that stretched beyond time. And as I closed my eyes for just a moment before the bus arrived, I held on to all of it, tightly, gratefully, like a secret I'd carry with me into every season that followed. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and still, I find myself lying in bed with the window slightly open, listening to the soft hush of wind through the trees. There's something about that sound that pulls me gently backward, past the years and the miles and the busyness of adult life, into the soft and golden folds of that summer long ago. The last summer before the internet, before the blinking lights and screens filled our evenings, before everything became urgent. In those moments, I wonder, did it all really happen the way I remember? Were the sunrises truly that warm, the sky that blue, the laughter that pure? Or have the years painted everything softer, kinder, more perfect than it was? But the answer doesn't really matter, because when I close my eyes, I can still feel the warm pavement under my bare feet. I can still smell the sweetness of popsicles and sun-warmed grass. I can still hear the distant voices of my friends calling my name, as if from another lifetime, yet right outside my door. I picture our old street, long before it changed, before the houses were painted over and the big oak tree was cut down. I see my bike lying in the yard, tilted like it had just been dropped mid-flight. I see Jamie balancing on the curb, arms out, eyes closed, pretending he could fly. I see Elsie spinning in circles, her hair a blur of sunlight, her voice singing a song we made up and then forgot. The days felt endless then, like the world had decided to stretch just for us. And now, years later, when the world grows loud or heavy, I return there in my mind. I don't even have to try. It finds me, in the smell of rain on warm concrete, in the hum of a ceiling fan, in the way the afternoon light filters through the curtains, golden and slow. And in that quiet remembering, I find a kind of peace. A peace that doesn't ask for explanation or proof. A peace that simply is. Maybe that summer was a dream. Or maybe it was a gift, a whisper from time itself, gently placed into my childhood like a seed that would bloom when I needed it most. We all carry those summers with us, tucked into the corners of our minds. They don't fade. Not really. They rest, waiting for us to pause long enough to hear them again. So tonight, as you lay your head down, take a breath, slow and deep. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your mind drift, not forward into plans or worries, but backward into those golden days when the world felt slower and the air was full of wonder. Let yourself remember the quiet thrill of riding your bike without knowing where it would take you. The way sunlight danced through the trees. The feeling of sand between your toes. A breeze carrying the scent of honeysuckle and far-off laughter. You were there, and in a way, you never left. Somewhere inside you, that child still lives, curious, open, dreaming. They are not gone, only waiting, waiting for you to return, even if only for a moment each night as you close your eyes and drift into sleep. The past does not vanish. It folds itself gently into who we are, like a lullaby echoing softly in the stillness. So let the memories rise, like fireflies blinking in the dusk. Let the warmth of that final summer carry you into stillness. Let the breeze of nostalgia wrap around you like a blanket. And if you find yourself smiling even just a little, know that somewhere in the quiet space between sleep and waking, that summer is still happening and you're still there, right where you belong. Good night.